Okay, here we go. Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. I know I said that Raiders of the Lost Ark is probably my favorite movie of all time, but if I'm being honest, Last Crusade is probably the better Indiana Jones movie. It's just outstanding. And if you like Indiana Jones as a character, then this movie almost has to be your favorite because there's a lot of character stuff in it. It's a more personal story. And it's really the only movie that gives you a ton of backstory for Indiana Jones. And I think anyone who's ever had a parent that you kind of butt heads with or don't get along with can probably relate to this movie, at least on some level. It's also really cool to see the history that they created for the Holy Grail and the quest for it. It's probably the best hunt for the artifact out of all the movies. And what I mean by that is it's really cool to see how they connect the dots and find it. Just great, and the Grail itself is way more fantastic than the Ark or the Sankara Stones. I mean, what this thing does is pretty crazy. But I think we should just get into it. Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade from 1989, directed by Steven Spielberg, starring Harrison Ford and Sean Connery. The movie opens up in Utah in 1912. A young Indiana Jones, played by River Phoenix, is with his Boy Scout troop. And his scout leader just kind of stops near these caves and lets everyone wander off on their own. It's pretty bizarre. But the Boy Scouts can be weird like that. And young Indy discovers some guys digging up something. Turns out to be an artifact called the Cross of Coronado. It's apparently an item with some link to Spanish conquistadors from the 1500s. And Indy grabs it. He believes it belongs in a museum. Okay, fair enough, but he doesn't know anything about these dudes. How does he know they're not going to sell it to a museum? In any case, he takes it and he makes a break for it. But they see him making off with it, and there's a chase. Indy gets on his horse. His whole troop seems to have fucked off. I don't know where the hell they went. Pretty irresponsible. And Indy hops on a train that is carrying a fucking three-ring circus. I mean, it's insane. There's all kinds of shit on here. Rhinos, giraffes, lions, reptiles. Is it a circus or a zoo? And if there's one thing I don't like about the opening scene in this movie, it's that we see how Indy got basically every single one of his character traits. I think that is more than a little ridiculous and not necessary in my opinion. Everything he became started right here. He falls into a pit of snakes. He wasn't scared of snakes a few minutes ago, but it's safe to say that he will be from this point on. And he ends up falling into a car that has a lion in it, and he uses a whip to keep it at bay. And we even see how he got the scar on his chin. They somehow felt the need to explain why Harrison Ford has a real-life scar on his chin. It's a little nuts. And quick side story. It's kind of a personal story. It's kind of insane. When I was about 7 or 8 years old, I was really into Indiana Jones. And my brother, who was the oldest, was probably about 20 or so. And he decided to give me a whip. A real whip. I don't know if it qualified as a bullwhip or not, but it was a real whip. It was legit. It wasn't exactly like Indiana Jones's. It was black. It looked more like the one he uses in this scene, actually. And I don't know how my brother got it. I don't know where my brother got it. I don't know why my brother got it, but he got it. And he gave it to me at age 7 or 8. And I was playing with this thing in the backyard for about 10 minutes before I hurt myself. I whipped myself in the fucking eyeball with it. I had kind of a black eye for a couple days, and I was lucky I didn't lose my eye. I mean, it was insane. It's literally a Christmas story. Instead of a BB gun, it was a whip. I whipped my eye out, basically, is what happened. And needless to say, my parents were not happy. I never saw the whip again, and my brother was, let's just say he was scolded for giving me that. Typical Long Island family stuff. Anyway, let's get back to this movie. So, Indy argues with these guys on the top of this train. He says the cross belongs in a museum, but these guys have other plans for it. And you'll notice that this one guy, basically has Indy's entire aesthetic. I don't know why Indiana Jones would eventually start dressing like the guy who he tried to take a historical artifact from, but he does. And the chase continues. Indy ends up in a car with magic accoutrements. Accoutrements used by magicians, that is. And he hides in a box. Somehow, he ends up running on the outside of the train. That's some mind freak shit. You remember the fucking Mind Freak? It's insane, the shit that was on TV in the early 2000s. Anyway, I guess this movie is trying to say that magic is real. That's basically what all the Indiana Jones movies are saying, but it seems that they're also saying that show magic is real. Anyway, moving on. Indy runs home, and he tries to tell his dad about the cross, but his dad doesn't seem interested. He asks Indy to count to 20 in Greek. And while he's doing that, the guys who are chasing him show up, with the sheriff, and some guy in a white suit and a Panama hat. He apparently has some legal claim to the cross. Either that or he just paid a lot of money for it. So they take it. And the guy who wears Indy's soon-to-be fedora says, "You lost today, kid, but it doesn't mean you have to like it." I mean, obviously, nobody has to like anything, especially losing. But I don't think that's what he means. I think he's saying just because you lost today doesn't mean you have to give up. And of course, he doesn't. And the dude gives him his fedora, and we see maybe the coolest transition in any movie ever made. And as the graphic says, Indy's on a ship on the Portuguese coast in 1938. And the same Panama hat dude says, "This is the second time I've had to reclaim my property from you." Referring, of course, to the cross. I don't know why this guy believes it's his property. I guess because he just paid a lot of money for it. That's all there is to it. It's never really explained, though. And he tells his goons to throw Indy over the side. And Indy, of course, kicks this idiot who is conveniently standing on the ledge of the ship. I don't know why that guy was standing there. It's kind of insane. And a fight ensues. There's obviously a storm thrashing the ship. Indy grabs the cross. And the Panama hat dude says, "Grab him, he's getting away." Which is weird. Getting away to where? They're on a ship in the middle of nowhere. It's kind of a weird thing to worry about. But he does get away. Just in time, too. He goes swinging off the ship just before a wave cripples it and causes it to explode. It's very extreme. And I'm assuming someone must have saw the explosion because Indy was obviously rescued. Because in the next scene, he's teaching at school. Class is dismissed. And after a brief conversation with Marcus Brody, Indy heads to his office, which looks to be in the basement. And he's mobbed by a bunch of students. He's apparently falling down on his teaching job lately. His students have a lot of questions. He hasn't graded their term papers. It's a mess. And he says he'll see each and every one of them in turn. He sits in his office for a few minutes, and he notices a package from Venice, Italy, and he sticks it in his pocket. And then he jumps out of the window to avoid his students. I mean, he's going to get fired. There's no question about it. And as he's walking, some dudes stop him, and they want him to go with them. They take him to see a guy named Walter Donovan. And he's played by Julian Glover. You know, General Veers from Empire Strikes Back and Grand Maester Pycelle from Game of Thrones. And Donovan is basically just some rich douchebag who contributes to the museum on a regular basis. And he shows Indy half of a mid-12th century stone tablet. And it seems to indicate the location of the Holy Grail. It's in a place called the Canyon of the Crescent Moon. And Donovan believes that the Grail grants eternal life to anyone who drinks from it. And the Grail was found by three brothers who were members of the Knights Templar during the First Crusade. And the second half of the tablet will reveal where the Knights took the Grail, I guess. And all they need to do is find it. And the other half is supposedly buried with one of the Knights somewhere in Venice, Italy. But Donovan says that his project leader has gone missing, and his project leader turns out to be Indy's father, Henry Jones Sr. I mean, he might have led with this information. Donovan is a bit of a dickhead for not telling him this right away, although we'll soon find out that he's a much bigger dickhead for a lot of reasons. And Indy and Marcus discover that Henry's house has been ransacked. Indy thinks his dad is in over his head, which seems obvious. He describes him as a bookworm, not a field man. And then he remembers the package he got from Venice, Italy. Seems like that should have clicked right away when Donovan mentioned the tablet is in Venice. But he didn't put that together until now. He opens the package, and it's his father's Grail diary, a complete record of his search for the Holy Grail. He's not exactly sure why he sent it to him, but it looks like he and Marcus are heading to Venice. And Donovan arranges for them to meet with Henry's colleague, Dr. Schneider. And Dr. Schneider is a young Austrian woman who Indy immediately starts flirting with, of course. And she gives him a note from his father, which has Roman numerals on it. They head to a big church that's been converted into a library, and Indy believes that the tomb is somewhere in the library. Indy connects the dots and finds the final Roman numeral on the floor. It's a big 10. X marks the spot. And he decides to break through the floor using a big metal pole. It's kind of a funny scene because the dude marking library books thinks he's making all the racket. And he makes a giant hole in the floor. Seems like questions are going to be asked about this. I don't know who's getting the bill, but it seems like a problem. And Indy and Elsa make their way down. There's bones everywhere, which is kind of insane. 6 feet below this church is a hidden graveyard. I don't know exactly how things work in Italy, but I think that just might make the 6 o'clock news. And some guys show up and knock out poor Marcus. They follow them down, and there's a Lost Ark callback, and they come across some water which is full of petroleum. There's also an obscene amount of rats. They might as well be in Willard's house right now. And Elsa is already proving herself to be far less annoying than Willie Scott because she doesn't feel the need to let out a blood-curdling scream every 5 seconds, which is nice. And Indy finds the tomb. They open it. They find the other half of the tablet, and Indy takes out a paper rubbing to make a copy of what the inscription says. But the bad guys show up, and they ignite the petroleum, which causes a massive fire. They hide underwater with the casket as cover, and they find a way out somehow. They end up coming up from a manhole in the streets of Venice. And the bad guys come out of the church chasing them, and they hop on some motorboats. And there's a boat chase. They end up accidentally going between some large ships, which apparently is very dangerous because the guys following them get smushed by the ships and they explode. I wouldn't think that would happen. I would think that the worst that would happen would be that they would just get stuck. But maybe these motorboats are kind of like the Ford Pintos of seafaring vehicles. That's a bit of a deep cut. In the 1970s, Ford Pintos were prone to bursting into flames. What a wild time that must have been. Anyway, the fight comes to a head when the lead bad guy is fighting Indy as their boat approaches a giant ship propeller. Somehow it's just sticking out of the water. What is going on with this fucking ship? It's like in 2 feet of water. Just a giant propeller sticking out of the water. I don't know what to make of it. And they escape onto Elsa's boat. And this guy's name is Qasim. He's part of an organization called the Brotherhood of the Cruciform Sword, and they protect the secret of the Grail. And just by saying that, he's kind of admitting that there is indeed a secret to be kept. Dude's kind of shitty at his job. And he says Indy's father is being held in the castle of Brunwald on the Austrian-German border. I don't know how he knows that, but he does. And later Indy's talking to Marcus about the tablet. He seems to have recovered nicely from getting whacked on the head by some cult members, so that's good. And somehow the paper rubbing that Indy made out of the tablet survived this whole fiasco. I mean, he was drenched from head to toe. You'd think this thing would be like wet toilet paper by now. But maybe he put it in some pocket Tupperware or something. I don't know. And they talk about the location of the Grail. The tablet mentions Alexandretta, which is an ancient city that was destroyed during the First Crusade. And it's now known as Iskenderun in Turkey. Indy says that his father kind of knew this. He made a map, and he just didn't know the name of the city where the journey starts. But with the information they have on the tablet and what he has in his dad's diary, he should be able to find it. It's kind of convenient, but it's only a 2-hour movie, and we got to get moving. So he sends Marcus to Iskenderun to meet with Sala, while he goes with Elsa to rescue his dad. But before they set off, Indy goes to Elsa's room to find it ransacked. She is in the bathroom listening to loud music, and she apparently didn't hear a thing. And Indy says they were looking for the Grail diary. And Elsa is upset that he didn't tell her that he had the diary. It's a weird scene because she seems angry for almost no real reason. They argue, and then they start making out. Feels a little forced. But I guess Venice just has that effect on people. Makes people horny. It's safe to assume they banged right here on the floor. And they head to the castle where Henry is being held. Indy poses as a Scottish lord named Clarence MacDonald. And he claims that they're here to view the tapestries. And the doorman doesn't quite buy it.
Dear me, the man is dense. This is a castle, isn't it? There are tapestries.
This is a castle, and we have many tapestries. And if you are a Scottish lord, then
I am Mickey Mouse.
How dare he?
So he punches his way in. I bet he wishes he just did that from the start instead of embarrassing himself by doing his best James Doohan impression. And Indy thinks he found his father's room, but it's wired with an alarm, so he swings into a window from the outside.
Junior?
yes, sir.
So this is Henry Jones, and he seems far more concerned about the vase he just cracked over his son's head than his son's head. But luckily, it was a fake. Thank goodness. And Indy explains that they found the tomb of Sir Richard, the inscription on the shield, the whole 9 yards, and of course, that the Grail was taken from the city of Alexandretta. And of course, Henry gets a little nerdy. He loves that the city is Alexandretta. He loves that Indy found the tablet. It's cool that he's just this archaeology nerd. And I bet they might have been tempted to make him this old badass adventurer just like Indy is. Especially since it's Sean Connery. It's not like he's a stranger to action. But I'm glad they didn't do that. And then some Nazi goons walk in.
Dr. Jones. Yes?
And they want the diary. Henry mailed it to his son, hoping to keep it away from the Nazis, but unfortunately he brought it with him. The German soldier even knows that he has it in his pocket, which should be a red flag for Indy. But he doesn't really give it a second thought. They argue, and Henry calls him Junior one too many times.
And who's gonna come to save you, Junior? I told you! Don't call me Junior. Look what you did! I can't believe what you did!
And I like how Henry is just ready to scold him, as though all he did was make a mess in the living room. In any case, they head out. They run into a Nazi colonel named Vogel, and he takes Elsa hostage. Henry seems surprised by this. He tells Indy that she's a Nazi, and Indy doesn't want to believe it. I don't know why. It's not out of the realm of possibility, surely. Just because he thinks she's fucking cute, I guess? I mean, come on. The fact that the bad guy he just killed before knew that Indy had the diary on him should be an indicator that there might be a traitor in his midst. But he's thinking with the wrong head. He doesn't buy it. He puts down the gun in order to save Elsa. Big surprise, she's evil. She takes the diary from Indy and says, "You should have listened to your father." Indy's not that quick on the draw in the first half of this movie. I can't really explain it. So they get arrested, and Indy asks his dad how he knew that Elsa is a Nazi. Henry says she talks in her sleep, indicating that they slept together, which should be a big, weird revelation, but I never could focus on that. Every time I watch this movie, I always wonder what the fuck she said in her sleep to indicate that she's a Nazi. I'm a little scared to even speculate. I mean, is she zig-heiling in her sleep? Instead of sleepwalking, does she sleep goose step? Or is it more subtle than that? Like, oh, I want to invade Poland. Neville Chamberlain's a douchebag. You know, I mean, who knows? But I'll tell you what, if I'm sleeping next to someone and they wake me up in the middle of the night saying Nazi shit, first of all, that would fucking terrify me. I mean, where's this coming from? Did you get possessed by the ghost of Colonel Klink or something? It's fucking horrifying. And second of all, get out. My grandfathers didn't get Purple Hearts, so I could end up soiling my loins with the nethers of some Nazi bitch with a sleep disorder. That was an attempt at humor, I think. Don't kick my ass. But back to the movie. Donovan is revealed. He apparently set this whole thing up after Henry refused to continue helping him, presumably because he found out he was working with Nazis. And Elsa notices that there are pages missing from the diary. She's referring to Henry's map with directions from the city of Alexandretta to the Canyon of the Crescent Moon. And Elsa knows that Indy must have given the map to Marcus Brody. And Indy says they'll never find Marcus.
Brody's got friends in every town and village from here to the Sudan. He speaks a dozen languages, knows every local custom. He'll blend in, disappear. You'll never see him again. With any luck, he's got the Grail already.
Does anyone here speak English? Or even ancient Greek? Water, no, thank you, sir.
So obviously that was a bit of a bluff. And Marcus meets Sala briefly before they are accosted by some Gestapo dickheads. Sala fights them off, but Marcus ends up in the back of a secret Nazi truck, and we've all been there. And back at the castle, Indy and his dad are tied up, kind of cartoonishly, to a couple chairs. Elsa says they need them alive in case they fail to recover the pages from Marcus. Obviously, they don't even know that he's already been captured. Elsa kisses Indy goodbye. It's weird. Turns out that she's going to Berlin for some weird reason. And they all just leave them there, tied to this chair. Indy asks his dad to reach into his pocket for a Lucky Charms Zippo lighter to burn through the ropes, which sounds like an ill-advised plan to begin with. They probably would have just lit themselves on fire. But we never get to see how that would have turned out because Henry drops the lighter. And the room goes up in flames as though it was drenched in Everclear. That's Everclear the booze, not Everclear the pop rock band from the 90s, whatever. So the room is on fire. And Indy and Henry manage to hop over to the fireplace to take cover. Which is obviously pretty ironic. And it turns out to be a secret passageway that leads to a Nazi convention. But fortunately, they're able to outsmart them, and they leave them all trapped on the other side, which is currently engulfed in flames. Indy finds another hidden passageway by falling down some stairs. Clever. They hop on a motorcycle, and the Germans are right behind them. Indy manages to fight them off. He jousts with one of them. Somehow, he also launches one 25 feet in the air. I mean, that shouldn't have happened, but whatever. They seem to have lost them for now, and Henry tells Indy that they have to go to Berlin to get the diary back, because it also has information about booby traps that they'll encounter and all sorts of weird shit. And unfortunately, he can't remember what they are without it. And Henry says that if the Grail is captured by the Nazis, the armies of darkness will wash over the face of the earth. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? And that's exactly what Marcus said about the Ark in the first movie. And we get a little bit of information about Indy's mother. She had some kind of illness, which she kept from the family. And Henry says all he could do was mourn her. And her death obviously didn't bring Indy and Henry any closer together, which is tragic. But it looks like they're going to Berlin. And there's this sign that says Berlin pointing one way and Venice pointing another way, which is kind of fucking nuts. I can't imagine a sign like this actually exists. Geography is not my strong suit. But that is like coming across a sign in, I don't know, Louisville, Kentucky. And the northern sign is pointing to Toronto. And the southern sign is pointing to, I don't know, fucking Cuba. It's kind of insane. I mean, I might be slightly exaggerating, but I don't think a sign like this would ever exist. But moving on, they go to Berlin and they end up at a fucking book burning convention. I mean, it's one of the many insane things that happened during the Nazi regime. It's fucking mental. And Indy disguises himself as a German officer. He's good at doing that. And he runs into Elsa. And he takes the diary off of her. They argue for a minute. And Elsa says she believes in the Grail, not the swastika. Which is honestly a little hard to believe, considering it's 1938, and you're at a book-burning convention in the middle of Berlin. And also that you ransack your own room to make Indy think that you're part of the team. It's just crazy. And Indy understandably gets frustrated. He thinks she's a lying Nazi piece of shit, and he puts his hand around her throat, and he says, all I have to do is squeeze. And she says, all I have to do is scream. It's pretty tough to scream when you're being strangled. I mean, I don't know from personal experience, but I have to imagine. Anyway, they get what they came for, so they're leaving. But then Indy bumps into Hitler. And he's played by Admiral Ozzel. So we just have a bunch of Empire Strikes Back alumni in this movie, don't we? And he signs the diary, which makes sense because historically, Hitler was a coked up moron. And he signed it in pencil, which is a dick move. I mean, that's not going to be worth anything. Anyway, they manage to book passage on a blimp, which seems like the slowest possible way to travel, but whatever. Not like we're in a rush, are we? But before they take off, Colonel Vogel shows up, and he finds Henry. But fortunately, he forgot to buy a ticket.
Tickets, please.
Boss.
And then they take off. They seem to have a moment to relax. Indy gets into it with his dad. Henry has a weird rationale for not being a very attentive father. He says that he taught Indy self-reliance. I mean, that's one way to look at it. Another way would be neglect, but okay. And you could see Indy just wants to kind of have a nice moment with his dad, but Henry is more interested in talking about the Grail and the booby traps that they'll encounter, which I guess is maybe more practical. And then the blimp starts turning around. They're heading back to Germany. Seems like Indy should have seen this coming, but luckily, they make their way to a propeller plane that is docked on the underside of the blimp. Convenient. And I guess Indy has taken some flying lessons since Temple of Doom, because now he can fly. He just can't land. So that's nice. And they end up in a dogfight with some German fighters, and unfortunately, they shoot themselves down. Tragic. They have a rough landing, which still counts as a landing, so I guess Indy can land. They steal some poor old guy's car, and the fighters are still hot on their tail. And one of them follows him into a tunnel. I mean, what an asshole. They ditch the car, and Henry is a little overwhelmed by the situation. And Indy is just whelmed.
Those people are trying to kill him. I know, Dad! It's a new experience for me. It happens to me all the time.
And they end up on a beach, and it seems like they're about to be gunned down, when Henry uses the seagulls to his advantage. He scares them off, they go flying into the fighter, and it crashes. Tragic for the seagulls, but at least Indy and his dad are alive. And of course, Henry explains how he came up with that idea.
I suddenly remembered my Charlemagne. Let my armies be the rocks and the trees and the birds in the sky.
So, it seems like Indy has a newfound respect for his dad. Being a bookworm can come in just as handy as a gun or a whip. And they meet up with Sala in Iskenderun. and he tells them that Donovan and a battalion of German troops set off into the desert with Marcus in tow. They catch up to them, and they see that the Germans have a big tank, and for some reason, Indy thinks they're well out of range, which is kind of insane. I mean, tanks can shoot pretty far, and this one does, and they've been spotted. It blows up Salah's car, which belonged to his brother-in-law. Tragic. But fortunately, the Brotherhood of the Cruciform Sword guys show up, and they attack the Nazis. And unfortunately, they're all killed. Tragic. And in the chaos, Henry sneaks onto the tank and meets Marcus, but Vogel catches them, and they're both held captive now. And Salah shows up with 5 camels, despite the fact that Indy just told him no camels. Salah says it's compensation for his brother-in-law's car. I'll tell you what, if I lend you my car, and you come back with 5 camels, we're going to have words. What the fuck happened to my car? And what am I supposed to do with 5 camels? What am I going to take a camel on the Long Island Expressway? That shit's chaos enough as it is. Anyway, Indy starts riding around on a horse, and he makes a fool out of the tank. he turns one of the guns into a daisy, and he ends up jumping onto the tank. Just before shooting 3 Nazi soldiers with 1 bullet from a Luger. I guess that's German engineering for you. Either that or Nazis just have very thin skin. Maybe it's a combination of both. And he fights with Vogel. A soldier is watching this fight through the periscope, and he says something to his buddy in German, which apparently translates to Americans fight like girls. Okay, first of all, sexist. Second of all, we'll see how he feels about that when 1945 rolls around. And a fight breaks out in the tank. Henry manages to use a pen to incapacitate this dude. The pen is mightier than the sword. And there's a lot of chaos going on. An explosion causes Indy to fall off the side of the tank, and somehow his satchel gets wrapped around the barrel of this giant gun. I have no idea how this happened. And the satchel is under his jacket, which makes no sense. But either way, he's being dragged to his doom right now. But thankfully, Marcus clobbers one of the bad guys, and he accidentally shoots the driver, causing the tank to turn at the last second. Indy climbs up and beats the ever-loving dog shit out of Vogel, while Marcus goes tumbling off the back of the tank, and Salah shows up on horseback to rescue Henry. And somehow the tank is heading towards a cliff. I don't know how that's possible because the driver's dead body leaned on the controls, causing it to turn. So it should be going in a circle right now. But somehow the dead guy must have straightened out the steering wheel. And Indy is super into beating the shit out of this dude. Who could blame him? But he doesn't notice the cliff, and the tank goes over the edge. And Vogel turns into a rubber doll that is just glued to the outside of it. Tragic. And Henry thinks that Indy has been killed. He says, I lost him, and I never told him anything. 5 minutes would have been enough. But Indy shows up. I guess he managed to get a hold of the side of the cliff just in time. It's kind of a miracle. And Henry is relieved.
I thought I'd lost you, boy.
I thought you had to, sir.
It's a really nice scene. And you can see how much Indy needed this hug from his dad. It's been overdue for about 40 years. And he also gets his hat back. Another miracle. They make their way to the canyon of the crescent moon. They find a structure carved into the rock face. It looks an awful lot like the city of Petra in Jordan. I guess that's because it is. And they find Donovan and his Nazi entourage already inside, failing to get past the first booby trap. There's dead bodies everywhere. Heads are rolling. And they capture Indy and his crew. And Donovan says Indy is going to get the Grail for him. He shoots Henry to motivate him. Only the healing power of the Grail can save him now. Donovan is making a lot of assumptions. I mean, he doesn't even know for sure that this thing has mystical powers or even that it exists in the first place. Fortunately, this is Indiana Jones, and it does. So Indy uses the diary to get past the first trap. It says, only the penitent man will pass. The penitent man kneels before God. So Indy kneels and avoids a spinning saw blade and another one that comes up from the bottom, which feels like cheating to me. Yeah, okay, the penitent man kneels before God. Okay, fine. Does he also have to roll out of the way to avoid getting his vas deferens chopped off? Apparently so. Just seems like the zealots who designed this thing might have been cheating a bit. This also looks like technology that is way beyond what they would have had when they made it, but whatever. The next test is the Word of God. He has to step on the correct letters on the floor, spelling out Jehovah in Latin. It's basically like a game of don't break the ice. Doesn't make a lot of sense. And the third and final booby trap is just an optical illusion, which makes a bridge look invisible. He basically has to take a leap of faith, although not really. He could have just poked his little tippy toe out and felt the bridge. But whatever. He finds a room with a 700-year-old knight, which is fucking insane, of course. He was one of the Knights Templar, and he took an oath to guard the Grail, which seems unnecessary considering the booby traps they left behind. I mean, I don't think it was in that much danger. It took 700 years. And what was this guy doing this whole time? My God, he's just sitting in a room. What does he eat? Does he need to sleep? I know obviously he's been drinking from the Grail, so he's basically immortal. But what the fuck was he doing? He must be bored to tears. Tragic. And Donovan and Elsa show up, and the room is filled with all sorts of cups and chalices. The real Grail could be any one of them. The knight explains that the true Grail brings life, while the false one takes it. So they have to choose wisely. And Elsa volunteers to choose for Donovan. She picks a fancy one, and Donovan drinks from it right away. I mean, what a dumb villain. He's got a gun. He could make Elsa or Indy drink from it first, but he doesn't. He just dives right in. And he turns into Skeletor's moldy cousin. And I'm not going to lie, this scared the piss out of me when I was a kid. It's fucking freaky. And Indy gives him a shove, and he crumbles into dust.
He chose poorly.
Yeah, no shit. That's the understatement of the millennium, you old codger. And it seems like Elsa chose wrong on purpose. She wanted to kill Donovan. This bitch doesn't know where her loyalties lie. She is back and forth. And Indy spots one that looks like the cup of a carpenter. And he should know, since Harrison Ford was a carpenter. I like to think that's a nice little reference. And he drinks from it, and he chose wisely. The knight explains that the Grail cannot pass beyond the Great Seal. That is the boundary and the price of immortality. Indy brings the full cup of water to Henry. Must have been hard to carry it across the booby traps, that demented bridge, and spelling Jehovah out again, backwards this time. But I guess he managed. And he gives it to Henry. His wound melts away. It's magic. And all seems well. But Elsa picks up the Grail and tries to leave. She takes it past the seal on the floor, and the whole structure begins to shake and crumble. The ground cracks open, and it seems like it leads straight to hell. And Elsa is hanging on for her life, with the cup resting on a small cliff just below her. Indy tries to pull her up, but she can't help but try to reach for the Grail, and she falls. And now Indy is hanging on for his life. Henry grabs his hand, but Indy also reaches for the Grail. Seems like the Grail is almost like the ring of power right now. I don't know what's going on, but it seems like it's irresistible. Maybe it has some mystical hold on Indy, or maybe immortality is just that tempting. Either way, he snaps out of it when Henry finally calls him Indiana instead of Junior. He says, "Let it go," and he's able to pull Indy up, and they escape just before it collapses. The knight waves bye-bye. Yeah, thanks for doing the exact fucking thing I told you not to do. Now my fucking house is falling apart. Thanks for that, you dickheads. And Indy, Henry, Sala, and Marcus get on horses. We find out that Indiana Jones got his name from the dog, which is nice. He's got a lot of fond memories of that dog. And the four of them ride off into the sunset. And that's the end of the Indiana Jones movies. Perfect conclusion to a perfect trilogy. And we can all be thankful that there aren't any more. I know. Wishful thinking. But it's a great movie. I love it. And I guess, Indy and his father aren't immortal because the knight was super old. So it seems like you actually have to keep continuously drinking from the cup to live a long time. It's not really immortality. It's just extended life, it seems. But whatever. Like I said, it's a great movie. I mean, how could you not love it? I love the stuff with Indy and his dad. And Harrison Ford and Sean Connery are great together. I really like that Elsa didn't make it. I'm glad that they resisted the temptation to have Indy sort of get the girl at the end. Because she's not worth it. It wouldn't have made much sense. I mean, she's a Nazi and a villain for the vast majority of the movie. I mean, the only halfway decent thing she does in the movie is protest when Donovan shoots Henry. And she also intentionally picks the wrong cup to kill Donovan. But even that is horrendously deceitful. Just because she did it to a piece of shit doesn't mean it was virtuous. And I also think that any parent that's not getting along with their kid should sit down and watch this movie. I'm not saying it's going to solve problems, but it can't hurt. And I really didn't plan on this video coming out around Easter. That's just kind of a coincidence. I was hoping to have it done at least a week ago, but it took me a while to get around to it because I knew it was going to be a lot. Mostly because I have a hard time shutting the fuck up. I mean, this is by far my longest video to date. But, happy Easter to those who celebrate and happy normal weekend to those who don't. And yeah, that's pretty much all I got for now. Let me know what you thought of this one. Unfortunately, the next one is going to be Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, so I guess keep an eye out for that. But I understand if you don't want to. I guess we'll see how that goes. But until next time, take it easy.